international waters, and you are not going to take us over without a fight. So people died, and a whole lot more were wounded, and it was savage, and it was nasty, and it was brutal, and it was cold-blooded. And we'll go back and do it again someday, won't we? I just mentioned this to you because I found it inspiring. I was one of the first Americans to get back by happenstance. And I was put on an airplane. It was very interesting. We were held, I'll just mention this briefly, that when they put me on the airplane to fly me back, I was brought out to the airplane and escorted with one other American, Joe Meadows, the Liberty veteran, by 3 police cars with the blue lights, and we were filthy. We'd been in the same clothes for 3 days, and we had nothing but our clothes and our passports. And I was quite sure when the cars came with the lights that everybody seeing that and then seeing these 2 scruffy-looking people get on the plane would quickly get off, but they didn't. But the highlight of this whole thing was when dinner was served, and I asked for the little bottle of red wine. They said, no, you cannot have any alcoholic beverages. You are a security threat to the nation. I hardly thought so. The Israelis confiscated everything. I got off the boat with my clothes and my passport, period. Everything else is still out there somewhere. My cell phone, my computer, my shaving kit, and some dirty underwear. They can keep that. A lot of people went into detention. We did not. I was taken off the ship and put through this process that the Israelis had set up. You may have seen videos of that. They took biometric measurements and medical examinations. And finally they said, sign this document. I said, it's in Hebrew. They said, it's okay, sign it. I said, I'm not going to sign it. I don't know what it says. It's the deed to my house. He said, sign it or you're going to go into detention. I signed it. And they said, you are being deported. Said, all right. Why am I being deported? Listen carefully. You have broken an Israeli law. What law? You have illegally entered Israel. I came in this way. You know, don't shoot. You forced me to come here, and that's illegally entering your country? Yes. And I said, we may be using the same words, but we are not speaking the same language. I think that is probably the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard of, that they force you to come in off a ship on which you've been captured on the high seas, and you've broken the law by coming. But that's the sort of thing that you face in that part of the world, especially when you deal with that aspect of the Israeli population. And as many of you may know, it isn't everybody that behaves that way. There are many groups in Israel that share the views that you have here. I have dealt with them, perhaps some of you have as well. So it is not a smart thing to group them all into, the same kinds of people, which is what they try to do to us here. Don't make the same mistake. There are many active groups in Israel working for the same objectives that we have. And here's something to think about for a second, if you'll forgive me. I've been involved in this business for a long, long time. I've gone through wars and evacuations, and people have attacked the house I lived in and the building I lived in, and my family's been taken away and all of this. But the objective is good. In the Middle East, everybody wants peace and security. The only thing that differentiates us from certain aspects of the Israeli population is how do you get there? The path towards that. I speak to Jewish groups and I say, look, think. Visualize where you want Israel to be 30 years from now. And now consider, how does she get there? And quite often you will see people thinking. Because the simple fact of the matter is that in the Middle East, in order for people to live in peace and security, They all have to live in peace and security. If only one country is living in peace and security, then there is no peace and security if the others do not share these benefits. And this is something that seems to elude the leaders of Israel over the decades, because you cannot have peace and security if you're surrounded by people who do not consider you a peaceful neighbor and with whom they can have decent, ordinary relations. Now, I don't want to turn this into a sermon, but the United States of America, I was in Gaza in 2006 as an international election observer with a small group of people. We talked with Fatah leaders whom we knew, we spoke to Hamas leaders, we spoke to people at polling places, and we watched, and they had a perfectly free and fair democratic election. The most visible proof of this is the election was run by Fatah, and they lost. Okay, that tells you something right there. This, of course, is one of the key problems with a democracy. In a democracy, if you're involved in a political exercise, you must be prepared psychologically to lose. Because if you can't accept that, then you don't have a democracy, because then the trouble starts. In any event, the United States said, no, sorry, we can't deal with you guys. You didn't elect the people we wanted. They said, well, wait a minute. It was a free and fair democratic election. Yeah, but you didn't choose the guys that we wanted. And this makes America look kind of strange, because we're pushing for democracy, but you better choose the right folks. So I have met a couple of times with Khalid Meshad, if you know who he is. And he talks to us about, America says, you must recognize Israel. And this is an educated man. If you've ever met him or heard him speak, he's an educated man, he's a thoughtful, intelligent man. And he said, but you know this, Ambassador Peck. Recognition is always reciprocal. We recognize you, and you recognize us, and no one has ever even suggested that Israel recognize Palestine. That's number one. Number two, what are we recognizing? Where are the borders of this thing we're supposed to recognize? Is it part of Gaza, all of Gaza, some of Palestine, all of Jerusalem? You can't recognize something if you don't know what it is. And number three, groups of people like Hamas do not recognize states. That's not one of their functions. Number four, you have to recognize Israel's right to exist. No nation in the world has ever had anybody recognize their right to exist. It's a state, it's a nation. That's the end of it. But to ask the oppressed, the people being ground under the heel of Israel, to recognize and accept Israel is a contradiction to anything that any rational person would expect or demand, and it comes about from the activities and the enormous power of the pro-Israel movement, which leaves us on the outside looking in. I have some good news to bring you because of the wonderful speech that the Vice President made about the Bibi. Bibi has sent a message back that says, from now on, Mr. Vice President, you only have to kiss my ring. Forgive an effort of humor, otherwise I'll cry. It is so sad, it is so miserably, unhappily sad to see what happens, what isn't happening out there for all these years. I think I've been in the Middle East now, I think 9 times in the last 12 years, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Syria, in the West Bank, in Palestine, in Gaza, in Jerusalem, of course, and in Tel Aviv, watching what is slowly taking place there. The Israelis are always prepared to talk. They can talk from now until the end of time, and while this is going on, they are continuing with their process of dispossessing the Palestinian people wherever they can be found.